This is Marcia Weeks, and you are watching the Marcia Weeks Show. We're coming to you live from Barbados. Beautiful, beautiful Barbados. Tonight we have with us, coming from Ghana, Honorable Sam George is going to be joining us. And we're excited about that because we would like to know exactly what is happening to Ghana since they have passed that law concerning the LGBTQ community in Ghana. There's just a lot of discussion all over the world about it, and people are beginning to worry about Ghana. But even before we do that, we want to share the national anthem with you. Barbados. Yes, Barbados. So those of you who are joining us from any of the African countries, from Ghana, wherever, this is the flag of Barbados. This is Barbados, okay? So whenever you see this flag, because we know the Ghanaian flag, so we want you to know our flag, okay? We have with us one of our guests will be from Ghana, Honorable Sam George from Ghana.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you from the motherland, from Accra, Ghana. It's a pleasure to join you, our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean.
But while we wait on specifically Mr. George, who will be with us at 7 o'clock this evening, I thought we needed to just discuss a little bit about neocolonialism and its impact on Africa and the African diaspora. Because I think some of what we're discussing tonight, as we look at Haiti and then we look at, what is happening in Ghana and some of the concerns that you hear, people are worried. What is America going to do now? To Ghana, you can't help but think, that we are still so afraid of our oppressors, right? Looking at a definition, so we could have a working definition for colonialism tonight as we start this little discussion here. Britannica tells us that it's a system in which the former colonial masters of a nation continue to dominate their colonial countries, such countries despite them being independent. It includes remains of colonialism that exist in different ways, including the use of colonial languages, marginalization of cultures of indigenous people and other economic and political means of domination of such indigenous people by their former colonial masters. And especially when we talk about languages, even for us here in the English speaking Caribbean, let's talk about ourselves. We don't believe that someone is properly educated unless they can speak the Queen's English. Because and those are vestiges of the colonial of our colonial rule. So, Ms. McLean, what are your thoughts about the impact of neocolonialism on Africa and its diaspora? Do you see that as an issue that we need to?
It very much is an issue, and let me say, if you might allow me, because we may have a viewer from Uganda, which is 6 hours ahead. But if Sharura is watching, I say hello to him because he said he was hoping to catch this. You see, Marcia, your show goes far and wide. But
True.
the reality is, and you mentioned, you gave a good working definition, and it is really what I would describe as the vestige of the earlier system of colonialism or
Hmm.
colonization, where in the case of a number of European countries, England, Spain, France, and so on, went across the world. I mean, if you take England, Britain, for example, the size of probably, I'm not even sure it's the size of Guyana, if I remember correctly. The world in pursuit of trade, and essentially a minority of people went and dominated significant numbers of individuals in several countries. If you think of India in relation to the UK, and of course the intention was to exploit the resources. As I said, a lot of this started with a search for markets for resources. That informed the relationship. Now, of course, it came with an attitude of superiority, in terms of that what I would call a very racist philosophy or thinking. And because they were able to plant themselves firmly in these countries, at the point in time where for some of them, they felt the need to separate themselves at the level of the political operations, but they
Hmm.
still need to continue domination. So, in essence, when you talk about neocolonialism, what you're talking about really is a mix of circumstances. You still have economic dominance, political interference, we have cultural penetration or subjugation. You mentioned languages. If you go to a single country like Nigeria, for example, I mean,
Hmm.
there are so many languages spoken. Now, in fact, even in the context of Africa, the carving up, what I would describe as the carving up of the continent, in a conference in Europe where the colonial powers decided that they were going to divide it up to suit themselves, ignoring perhaps traditional ethnic and religious and cultural differences, or how people came together. So, in essence, what you had is a system that has remained because of what transpired during that colonial period. It was the exploitation of these countries for the benefit of the people of the colonizing of the colonizers, the countries in the West. So they often left. I mean, different countries had different types of systems in place, and in many instances they left the countries without proper infrastructure, proper educational systems, etc. And most important, or very importantly, the control of the resources or the wealth of many of these countries by some of these people, who remained either physically or economically in control. For example, we know of the plantation system in this part of the world, which meant
Yes.
that large tracts of land would have been controlled and owned, whether you're talking about the Caribbean, or you're talking about a place like South Africa. So what you really have is a system where independence does not translate into what I would call effective independence, where countries are largely in control of their economies, of their societies, etc. And of course, another characteristic, of course, would be what we can describe as power imbalances. And so really and truly, it is a continuing reality. It is one that has served to stymie or impact negatively on the growth of many of these economies. So that created a number of problems. So on several fronts, we see the continuation of some of the problems created by the systems that went before. And it ends up meaning that unless countries can wrestle control of
Yes.
of these various factors that people seek to retain under their control, we're going to have some problems. We can explain what is happening.
It is the people's show, right? It is the people's show. They're making sure that it happens. So we wanna thank God for the people of Barbados. It's their show. But Mr. Franklin, we've been talking about neocolonialism and its impact on Africa and the African diaspora. What are your thoughts on that?
For me to talk about neocolonialism, I gotta talk about colonialism first.
Yes.
And because that is and basically that is racism, because they have this superiority complex. They feel that they were better than all of us. They had to civilize us, and they conquered territories like India that was far more progressive than them. Africa, they brought people to Barbados who could recite the Quran, and you could and they call them heathens because they have this superiority complex. They feel that the white people I'm talking about, they feel that they're better. This book that I have here, I keep it and I read it ever so often, but I gotta take it in small doses because it might get me angry and go and beat some white people. It's called the Staying Power: The History of Black People in Britain. I first came across this book many years ago when a friend of mine, who he was married to a white woman, a white English woman, he said, Kaz, when if I had read this book before I married a woman, I got married to because he then saw how bad it was for black people, because he left Barbados and went to England, and Barbados, we still semi-worship the white people, but he went over there and he found a white lady who liked him and stuff, and they got together and had children. But he told me he would not have married if he knew all the stuff that they did to black people, and they didn't classify us as like blacks, and you were all kafirs, the term that they use for mostly the Indians, you were not black, you were just a kafir. And this book tells me, they said that the Manding men, there was a kind of jealousy too, because the Manding men, that they said that their members were, and that the white people got jealous of that too, because they saw that as something that they have to get rid of, because they couldn't. I'll tell you what happened when the men, their wives saw the Manding men, those fellows who they would go and experiment with it, and it was a death sentence if you got caught. The wife would be divorced or beaten or something. So, but the men got enticed, and if you didn't satisfy the white woman, she would tell the husband, "You trouble she, so you were between a rock and a hard place. So you better go and do what you had to do, and hope that your husband don't find out you live." So it was jealousy, and it was the education, because a lot of philosophy, maths, whatever, came from Africa. They wanted to destroy that. They wanted to believe that they were better, and they even imposed this one wife thing on us. This was not part of the African experience. So they enslaved our ancestors, and it wasn't for anything to do with any civilizing the natives. They wanted to make money. They came into the Caribbean and India, but the place is hot. They couldn't handle it. So they brought people who they think could work in these fields. It was nothing more than that. And abolition wasn't something that Wilberforce got for us, and it became uneconomical to maintain slaves when you could free them, and then you didn't have to be responsible for their food, because there wasn't any medical bills or anything, so that if you got sick, you died. So it was messy. It was cheaper. The Otto Badger in Antigua, who was a member of the assembly, Antigua didn't go through the apprenticeship system, where they had to go this 4 years before they finally released them, because he said, Ben, in the Antigua house, he said he did the numbers. He was always opposed to it, but when he did the numbers, he realized it was far cheaper to till his fields with free labor because they paid them pittance than to keep the slaves captured. So that's they got, but they didn't have anywhere to go. Antigua wasn't too big. Same thing with Barbados. And if you get escape from Barbados, we're going to hide under somebody's cellar. It didn't work out for us. Mind you, Jamaica, they had a better deal. They could go in the hills. You had the Maroons. But then they gave us independence. It was negotiating from a position of superiority. If you remember your show, Marcia, when we had the clip there, the guy who was supposed to be handling the chairman of the negotiating group, he was telling Barrow he got to apologize for something he said because he figured that Barrow was inferior to him. So Barrow let him know who was the boss, and but that was it. They always had this superiority, and they negotiated terms and conditions of our independence that will still leave them, especially in the francophone countries, leave them in charge, leave them raping the country still. Right now, France is still in control with the economies of a lot of these francophone countries that they gave independence to the 60s, 50s, and 60s, because France got to print the money, France got to do anything. So it is from a position of they believe that they're superior. And some of us allow them to believe that they're superior. So we have also embraced this neocolonial existence because the black people still think of these people as massa. And that is our problem. We have a collective, and I'm not happy to say it, but we have a collective inferiority complex among black people. You got a few people out there who don't have it, and they would challenge me. But when you look at the majority, that is something that was bred into us, and it is hard to get it out. It has become part of the DNA. So you would, like Maxine would always complain, but people will talk about a black woman but a white lady. We still have that because it's always a white lady.
Yeah, I agree.
A white gentleman but a black man.
Yeah.
It is what they have bred into us, and we have not been able in all these years after independence. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, and I hope to live well long.
Let me just introduce this gentleman that we've been passing around his videos all about. I've gotten them. I don't know how many times they've put it up. They've just been sending his stuff all about throughout the region. And so the Caribbean welcomes tonight Mr. Sam Narty George. He was the assistant director at the office of the head of civil service from 2010 to 2014, and a communication specialist at the office of the president from 2014 to 2016. In 2021, together with other members of parliament, he proposed a law criminalizing homosexuality and many forms of LGBTI support and activism. He was born January 22nd, 1985. He's a Ghanaian politician. He's a member of the National Democratic Congress. In 2015, he defeated the incumbent E.T. Mensah to represent the party in the 2016 parliamentary elections of Mingo Prampam constituency. I hope I've done justice to those places. Sam George is currently a member of both the Public Accounts Committee and the Communications Committee. And we say from Jamaica, Barbados, St. Vincent, Trinidad, everybody's watching, and we join in. And as Camille Allen from Barbados is saying, greetings, Honorable Sam Narty George. It's an honor to have you here. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you from the motherland, from Accra, Ghana. It's a pleasure to join you, our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean.
Yes, sir. It's really an honor to have you here. When we say have you here, like you're here physically, you're visiting us virtually. Have you ever been to the Caribbean region, sir?
Yes, I've been to Bahamas twice.
You've been to Bahamas twice? Oh my goodness. Well, you know, everybody on here is going to tell you to make sure you come to their country. We have people watching from Trinidad and, of course, Barbados, because the show is located in Barbados. And people are on from Jamaica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines and various Caribbean countries. Everybody's going to come and, want to tell you, come to their beautiful country. And so next time you come, make sure you visit somewhere else.
I hear you. There was a trip planned to Ocho Rios with a few friends. It will happen in the shortest possible time, and maybe we'll use the opportunity to see the other part of the Caribbean. It's a beautiful place.
Yes, wonderful. Let me just introduce you to Mr. Caswell Franklin. He's, as I said, he's based here in Barbados. The show is based in Barbados, and he is one of our leading trade unionists here in Barbados from the Unity Workers Union. And beside him, right there, is Miss Maxine McLean, and she's a former Minister of Foreign Affairs. So she's been following your videos, and we are excited to have you here, sir. Now, we've received several questions, Honorable George, from various persons within the Caribbean region. But the first question we want to ask you is if you can explain to us the climate in Ghana, before this new legislation was passed. Why was it necessary for this new legislation that, and when it comes on to the LGBTQ community, that is very harsh? Why was it necessary, sir?
All right, thank you very much. Ghana's always dealt and lived as a very hospitable nation. In fact, one of the biggest things Ghana sells is our hospitality. We've got quite a number of diasporans who've returned to Accra. In my constituency in Ingo Prampram, I've got a huge Jamaican community of Jamaicans who've come back to the motherland, who have relocated, have been given Ghanaian citizenship. We're big on welcoming people from all parts of the world. However, our culture is a very big part of our identity, and we believe that our culture must be respected by everyone who comes into our country. I mean, I can't visit your house and say that in your house everybody drinks water naturally through their mouth, and say that in my house where I come from we drink water through our ears, and so as my host you must stop drinking water through your mouth, you must start drinking water through your ears. That's unacceptable. And so Ghana's always had legislation that criminalizes unnatural canal knowledge. Ghana gained independence as the first Black African country in sub-Saharan Africa in 1957. In 1960, we passed the Criminal Offences Act, Act 29 of 1960, and Section 104 of that act clearly states that unnatural canal knowledge is prohibited. It criminalizes unnatural canal knowledge. Now, it's been on our statute books for a while, and since 1960. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Ghana distinguished that act when it went before the Supreme Court for interpretation. The Supreme Court defined natural canal knowledge in a landmark case called Banusin versus the Republic. Now, in that case, the Supreme Court stated what natural canal sex was and described it as natural intercourse between a male and a female that had the slightest level or a certain level of penetration of the female sexual organ by the male sexual organ. It then meant that anything other than that was unnatural canal knowledge. Now, we've lived peacefully and quietly with people because nobody cares what you do in the privacy of your bedroom. Nobody's going to come into your bedroom to see what's going on in your bedroom. And then COVID struck. And when COVID struck in 2019, 2020, we had the lockdown in 2020. I spent a lot more time at home with my kids. I've got very young kids. And I got worried and concerned by the content of the cartoons they were watching, because the very cartoons I watched as a kid, Superman, Spider-Man, SpongeBob, all now had LGBTQ themes in there. And that left me very worried what my kids were watching. And then in January 2021, after we came out of lockdown in Ghana, we saw the opening of what they called an advocacy office. And in attendance at that program, and was funded that advocacy office was funded, and there was an attendance by the EU rep to Ghana, the Australian High Commissioner at the time to Ghana, and the Danish ambassador to Ghana at the time. This was in January 2021. So in February 2021, as soon as Parliament reconvened from our Christmas break, I made a statement on the floor of the House, calling on state security to immediately shut down that office, and indicated that I was going to bring a tighter legislation to deal with homosexuality and the advocacy of it, because this office was supposed to be an advocacy office. And so we're going to deal with advocacy. It took us about 7 months to put the bill together. And in August 2021, we presented the bill to Parliament. The bill has looked at all forms and shades of the alphabet folks, as I like to call them. They're trying to steal the alphabet from kindergarten kids. It deals with all representations of homosexuality, but deals very strongly with advocacy. And if you read the bill that Parliament passed about 2 weeks ago, punishment for homosexuality itself is a fine or a jail sentence that ranges from 2 months to a maximum of 3 years, or both. But the punishment for advocacy is, it doesn't have a fine. It's straight incarceration, 5 years minimum, maximum 10 years. So you can clearly see that the focus of the bill is to deal with advocacy, because it's with advocacy that they subconsciously indoctrinate the children. It's with advocacy that people then begin to spread the mental malaise and mental illness that homosexuality is. And so we're really looking at that and trying to clamp down on that. So basically, that's the background to the legislation here in Ghana. The Criminal Offences Act still stands, Section 104, but what we've done with this bill is to now take care of things like transgender, like lesbianism, because if you look at the interpretation that the Supreme Court gave in Banusin versus the Republic, it was impossible then to prosecute lesbians, for example, because it spoke about penetration of the male organ and the female organ. And so you couldn't deal, and that's because the 1960 legislation was focused on gayism, which was the known form or expression of homosexuality at the time. Today, we're speaking of over 96 different expressions of homosexuality. And so we've tried to make the law woke. Let me put it that way. Since they're trying to be woke and push a woke agenda, we've passed a woke law to deal with the woke madness.
Wow, very, very, very bold, I tell you. There's a question here from someone in Jamaica, and they're asking, they say, some say that same-sex or homosexual attraction may be involuntary, but behavior is voluntary. How would you respond to the argument that the bill should not punish what is outside of a person's control, their feelings, rather than what is under their control, their behavior?
Well, if we were not to criminalize feelings, then society is going to become chaotic. Society is going to become literally a jungle, because people feel broke and have to deal with it. So if someone were to rob a bank because they felt broke, would we say that we're not going to criminalize their action because it's a feeling? If I woke up tomorrow, and this is a question I asked the people from the American embassy in Ghana who reached out to me and the British embassy. I said to them, if I woke up tomorrow and said I felt American, would they give me access to the United States without a visa? Would I get the benefits of an American citizen simply because I felt like that? We cannot give people rights on the basis of their feelings. Then pedophiles also feel that way. And already they're beginning to make a claim for it and say that they are not pedophiles. We should call them minor attracted persons. Then people feel that they should have sexual intercourse with their own blood sisters or their mothers, and that should not be called incest. We should allow it. So you cannot get rights. You see, rights must be justiciable. It's one of the basic principles in law that for you to demand a right, your right must be justiciable. And for something to be justiciable, you need to be able to define it. And you need to be able to explain that something that's justiciable is objective and not subjective. So how one person feels is a subjective, is not an objective test, it's a subjective test. And anything that's subjective and not objective cannot be justiciable. And so your feelings are subjective because your feelings are only related to you. And then you cannot get a right that is justiciable on the basis of what you feel. You understand me? And so that's why you can't separate the behavior from the act. Again, let's be very clear on one thing, Um, when people say they feel one way or the other, look, let's call a spade a spade. As kids, we all as a boy growing up, I played with my mom's clothing. I mean, I wore my mom's high heel shoes. I put her wig on my hair. It didn't make me want to become transgender. My parents didn't look at me and say, "Oh, he's a girl trapped in a boy's body." No, that was me as a kid exploring. The girls who tried to wear their father's shoes or see if they could fit in a trouser didn't make them a boy. Today, we're taking away the innocence of children and not allowing them to be children, and destroying these children all on the basis of claiming that they are kids who are trapped, boys trapped in girl skin or girls trapped in boy skins, and destroying these children. And 30 years on in the United States, you can see the effect it's having on people who've gone through this irreversible hormonal treatments and surgeries that have made them transgenders. And so, look, I keep saying that what you do in the privacy of your bedroom is not my business. But once you take your personal idiosyncrasies and personal sexual preferences and seek to make them the object of public advocacy, then prepare for public legislation to deal with your public advocacy. And that's what's happening here in Ghana. So my response with the legislation is to public advocacy of what should be people's private business. Keep it in
Yeah.
your bedroom. Don't try to indoctrinate my child. And I keep saying this, that if you take every legislation, and I've heard people say that the legislation I've sponsored is an affront to international law, and I've constantly challenged them from CNN to BBC to whichever platform has interviewed me. I've challenged them to show me which legislation. I say to them that they think the black man doesn't read, but this black man here, this brother here does read. Because the question is very simple. Show me which international legislation gives rights on the basis of sexual preference. None. Absolutely none. And I say to them that in Ghana, for example, and again, laws are jurisdictional. So you cannot look at what happens in Jamaica or what happens in Bahamas and try to use that to pass legislation in Ghana, because even though we may be very similar, we're very different as well. We have our unique jurisdictional identities. If you take Ghana's 1992 constitution, which is the supreme law of Ghana's land, of the land here in Ghana, it says that it gives a lot of rights to citizens. However, it doesn't give them rights on the basis of sexual preference, and even the right to life. The Constitution says that Parliament may pass legislation that would curtail your right to life or any other right you enjoy in the Constitution on the basis of three grounds: public health, public safety, and most importantly, public morality. This is in Ghana's Constitution. Public morality. And so it's important that we realize that LGBTQ is an affront to public morality. It's an affront to public health. When you look at the health consequences of homosexuality, because you look at the CDC, and the CDC is clear that if you take homosexual people, they're 400% more likely to contract HIV/AIDS. That's a health scare. That's a bill on the public purse. If you take homosexuality, they're 40 times more suicidal than straight men. They're 40 times more likely to abuse substance than straight men. That in itself is a public health crisis. So if we pass legislation curtailing rights, even if they were to exist, we will be doing so on solid grounds. Again, when you take the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it states clearly, I think in Article 18 or so of the African Charter on Human Rights, that the family is the base unit and the state must take the appropriate steps to protect the family from any assault, and that the family has the sole right to determine how the child of that family is educated. Sole right belongs to the family, not an educational board, not a government ministry, not a president. The family. It's my child. it's my responsibility to bring that child, and not an educational board. You don't choose how to train and bring up my child. Absolutely not. So that's basically what this is.
This is straight talk. We're getting straight talk here tonight, and I can tell you, I could see where your law degree, is coming into full effect and working in this season. This is so important. Now we have a question from Trinidad. As I said, we have a Caribbean issue. This is a real challenge where we're seeing our leaders are being almost, they're under pressure to bow and to bend and to change our family structure, etc. Now Trinidad is asking. The question says many of us are here in the Caribbean due to slavery. As you know, money played a major role in the evil of slavery. Do you think this is happening with the LGBTQ issue in Africa? And if so, how can you effectively respond to that challenge?
Well, absolutely. Money's playing a big role. Money's at the base of everything that's been done here. I mean, since 2021, when I brought this legislation, there have been several offers that have been made to get me to drop the bill, both from forces within Ghana and forces outside of Ghana. First, they've used coercion, then they've used threats, then they've used bribery. It's not going to work because, like I said, if you don't stand for something, you fall for everything. And for me, this battle that I've engaged in is not, it's about two things. It's about the innocence of Ghanaian children, which we want to protect, and then it's about fighting for our cultural identity. We are not going to lose that because the West has lost its identity. Their societies have collapsed because they've destroyed the family unit, and we're not going to import the problems and sicknesses of the West into Africa. However, the truth must be said that you have a lot of corrupt leadership here in Africa. And I'm sure it's a similar thing in the Caribbean. Corrupt leadership that's up for the highest bidder. They've lost their morals. They've lost their values. Many of them have corrupted themselves so badly that they're even being blackmailed into supporting this. I remember that sometime last year, Kamala Harris actually visited Ghana just because of this bill whilst it was in Parliament. And when she met with the president, there was a staged question by an American journalist to her about the bill, and she stated that she was concerned about the bill and asked the president. And as usual, because the current president of Ghana, with the greatest of respect, is a big disappointment to the Ghanaian people and has sold out to the LGBTQ cabal, he literally ran away from the bill and said, I don't know anything about the bill. It's a private member of parliament who is sponsoring that bill, and so we'll see where it gets. They never thought we'll be able to get the bill through parliament because they tried to use the executive power to whip their members not to get the bill to pass through parliament. But we caught them by surprise and passed it unanimously in parliament without the executive having a wind of it on the 28th of February. Now, after we've passed the bill, our constitution says after we've passed the bill, the president must assent to it. Then on the 4th of March, the president meets the diplomatic corps and makes a promise to the diplomatic corps that he's not going to sign the bill because there is a case in court. There was no case in court, but the president said there was a case in court, in the Supreme Court, challenging Parliament's ability to pass a legislation. This was on the evening of the 4th of March. Boom, 5th of March at 1 p.m., a lawyer who works in the law firm of a friend of the president goes to court to file a case against the bill. So clearly, you could see how this was orchestrated. But again, I've made the point most forcefully in Ghana that the president must go ahead and sign this bill because there have been other instances where Parliament has passed legislation and it's been challenged in the Supreme Court, and the president has said he is exercising his constitutional mandate as president to assent to bills. So he will go ahead and assent to the bill. And if the Supreme Court decides subsequently that the bill was wrong, then the bill can be thrown out by the law can be thrown out by the Supreme Court. So I wonder why now he's changing his standard and saying, I'm going to wait. But this is not the first time they've gone to court. They went to court last year, and there was a 9-member panel led by the Chief Justice herself. And we won that case 9-0 against the LGBTQ cabal. And so we're confident that this time again we will win, even though they've just gone to court. There is enough pressure on the president that's coming from the traditional authorities, the chiefs, the National House of Chiefs, the Christian movement, the Islamic movement, the traditionalists in Ghana, everybody is asking the president to sign. In fact, there is the biggest think tank that is doing advocacy for LGBTQ, which is a right-wing think tank in Ghana. It's called the CDD Ghana. They did a public survey trying to see what the position of Ghanaians were, and Ghanaians were 97% hospitable and acceptable to foreigners coming into Ghana. Ghanaians were 91% hospitable to persons of different ethnicity, different religion, and different political persuasion. 91% tolerance levels. When it came to homosexuality, the tolerance level of Ghanaians was only 7%. It tells you that we're a very tolerant country, but when it comes to LGBTQ, tolerance is only 7%. We don't work.
Yeah.
You're not welcome in Ghana. If you're coming to Ghana for any of the things to taste our good food, our spicy, lovely delicacies, you're welcome. If you're coming to see the slave castles, you're welcome. If you're coming to enjoy the hospitality of Ghana, you're welcome. But if you're coming to Ghana because of LGBTQ, you're not welcome. And I made that case straight to Kamala Harris when the president failed to tell her to her face. I held a press conference and told her she wasn't welcome in Ghana. We're asking her to leave our country. Ghana is not the 51st state of the United States. We are a sovereign, independent nation. And I told Kamala Harris that if anybody wanted to take a lesson on human rights, the United States is the last place we'll go to, because the United States is the biggest abuser of human rights in the world. And if there was anybody who needed help, because she said she was ready to offer help, I am also ready to offer legislative help to the Capitol, the US Senate, to help them pass strict gun legislation to protect American children from being slaughtered in classrooms. They need help. We don't need help.
Mr. Sam, Honorable Sam Narty George here from Ghana. There's a question here from Trinidad as well. And it says, since there is a strong evangelical movement in Ghana, what are the church leaders and prophets saying and doing on the issue of the LGBTQ? I know you touched on it a while ago, but the person is asking, do you think they're doing what needs to be done? And we're asking that because somehow in the Caribbean, we feel like the church seems to be becoming afraid and not wanting to speak out and so on. What's happening on the ground there in Ghana?
So the church is very big. You've got Ghana having 72% of our population being Christian. And so you've got a huge Christian population. You've got very powerful, what you call Orthodox, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, the Catholics, and then you've got a huge charismatic movement, what maybe you call the evangelical movement. We call them the charismatics here. I'm a charismatic myself, and we do have a lot of pastors coming under the umbrella bodies. So they've got umbrella bodies like the GPCC. The GPCC is the Ghana Pentecostal and Charismatic Council. The GPCC's membership makes up 25% of Ghana's population. So that's a very powerful group. You've got the Catholic Bishops' Conference as well, which makes up about another 15% of Ghana's population. So between the GPCC and the Catholic Bishops' Conference, you have about 40% of the population in just those two groups. Now, we've had those groups endorse this bill. In fact, on the day when I presented the bill to the Speaker of Parliament, I had the leadership of all of these ecumenical bodies accompany me in Parliament to do the presentation.
Wow.
It was a show of strength. It was a show of force. I had the National Chief Imam, who is the spiritual leader of Muslims in Ghana, and we have 15% of Muslims. And he sent a representative to follow us to do the filing as well. But if you ask me in all honesty, do I think there's a lot more the church can do? Certainly. There's a lot more the church can do, because I'm a member of the church. I mean, I grew up in the church, and the church taught me several things. This fight is not supposed to be my fight, it's supposed to be the fight of the church. But I sit in Parliament and I've taken a legislation. They pray for me, they support me and my colleagues, but you expect them to speak more forcefully. And it is obvious, I know for a fact, the American ambassador to Ghana, Virginia Palmer, who's a very big gay lobbyist, because I followed her work in Malawi all the way to when she was kicked out of Malawi because the church in Malawi rose up against her, and then she was then moved into Ghana, and she's basically visiting all these men of God in their homes and trying to lobby them to soften their stance or stand down on in their support for the bill. She and the British High Commissioner are doing that. I know the EU Commissioner is doing same. And the thing is, at times, some of the men of God look at the fact that they've got branches in Western countries of their churches, because you've got a number of these Ghanaian churches having branches in the US and in Europe, and they begin to think about the bottom line, which is the dollar. But I believe that ultimately they need to know that this is about their faith and salvation. It's not negotiable. Like I keep saying, the innocence of Ghanaian children cannot be bought. For all the jewels on the crown of the British monarch, you can't buy the innocence with all of that. I won't sell it to you. And so, yes, there are a few of them who stood up and said to the ambassadors, to hell with you. I can readily mention the head of the Assemblies of God Church, the general superintendent of the Assemblies of God Church, Reverend Steve Wengam, who's blatantly said to them, I'm not going to back down today. I'm not going to back down tomorrow, because we support Sam George and believe in what he's doing. The head of the largest Pentecostal church, the Church of Pentecost in Ghana, which is huge. The Church of Pentecost is huge. The Church of Pentecost has almost 5 million members. They've made it clear to the president that they will not support homosexuality. They've made it clear to the foreign missions as well. The Catholic Bishops' Conference last week issued a statement telling the president that if he refused to assent to the bill, we have elections in December this year, they will campaign against him. They made it clear to him they will campaign against him. And the Catholic Church has 5 million members as well. And so they've made it clear to the president that they will campaign against him and his party. There are few of them who are not able to come out strongly, but we've got a few good men who are still standing for God and for what is right.
This is tremendous. I mean, I could just imagine what you felt being in Parliament, presenting this bill, and with all of these representatives there to support you. That must have been, very, very powerful. From Barbados, there's a question. Why do some, and do you consider the LGBTQ movement a sinister neo-colonial plot? If you do, how can you break this down so that the average man and woman understands its danger for Black people?
All right, you just need to understand what it is that this LGBTQ movement is. Until 1976, LGBTQ or homosexuality was considered a mental illness in the United States. It was treated the same way as schizophrenia. And if you took the DSM, the Diagnostic and Scientific Manual, that was used to train medical doctors in the United States up till 1976, homosexuality was considered a mental illness. Now, when they decided to declassify it as a mental illness, it wasn't based on scientific research. It was based on an opinion poll of 6,000 Americans. 6,000 Americans. I mean, really, that's what they used to declassify homosexuality as a mental illness. And for me, it was purely political. It was a political campaign that had been waged. And if you look at what they've done, they've targeted certain demographics. And if you look at the United States, for example, within the African American community, homosexuality is quite prevalent and quite huge there. And it's a systematic thing. If you looked at the US in 1894, the growth rate, population growth rate in Black American families was 9.2. 9.2, meaning for every Black American family, they had about 9 children. And the growth rate in white American families was 2.1, meaning they had literally just 2 children. Now, what they've done, if you fast forward to the African American family, the Black American family in 2024, what the growth rate is 1.9, which means that the average African American family is having less than 2 kids. Now, once your population growth rate for any demographic drops below 2, that demographic is dying. Because when you have 2 children, it means a man and a woman have had 2 kids. And so 2 is basically sustaining the population size. That is giving the possibility that none of those children die. So what they've done is, and if you look at Africa, and I'm sure they're doing the same thing in the Caribbean, they have this population caucus movements that are telling you to watch your population growth rate. And if you look at all what they're saying to you, they're always giving you the standard population growth rate at less than 2. It's always around 1.5, 1.8, because they want your population sizes controlled. Now, how did they do that with the Black American community? It was with the privatization of the penitentiary system that put money in the hands of private people for the number of people they had in their jails. Now, how did they get more people in jail? It's by messing up the justice system and jailing more people, sending more people to jail. So money is at the bottom of all of this. And so you then realize that, and I'm sure you've seen this complaint in America, that a crime a white man does and gets a fine or gets a short sentence, a Black man does it and gets life or gets a very long sentence. The two different justice systems in the US. So what they then did was to begin to pick a lot of young Black Africans or African Americans and incarcerate them between the ages of 15 to 25 and give them long sentences. So they give them sentences of between 20 to 40 years. Now, these young men get incarcerated at the peak of their sex drive. How do they deal with this? They have to turn to homosexuality in prisons. Now you have all of these young men locked up between 15 and 25 for 15, 20, 30 years. They come out of jail after 40, where their sex drive is declining, but they've spent all of their active sex lives being gay, engaged in sodomy. And so they don't have an appreciation of what family life is. They don't have an appreciation of procreation the natural way. Now that's what they've done to control the Black population in the West. And now you realize that countries like Canada have actually they're facing depopulation. And so now Canada is offering visas like confetti on the African continent. For Ghana, for example, I mean, for the past 30 years, the Canadian embassy has not given up to 1 million visas. However, this year alone, they are giving, between 2022 and 2025, they intend to give 1.5 million visas. So that tells you what's going on. They need the human resource, and they're targeting skilled labor because they don't have it. So Europe is in a population decline, maybe with the exception of Italy and countries like Hungary, but Central Europe is actually in a population decline. So now what they're doing is targeting Africa and trying to control the population using all of this. Now, why we call it cultural imperialism is that you're trying to change the culture of a people. And they're using the poverty of Africa. And it's a sad situation because Africa is the richest continent, but it's the poorest at the same time, because we're so rich in natural resource, but we've got so corrupt leadership that our corrupt leadership has left us so broke, we need to depend on the IMF and the World Bank and on hand-me-downs. And the system is so rigged to make us remain impoverished that unless you have radical thinking, you can't break out of the cycle of poverty. Because, for example, between Ghana, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, we produce 75% of the world's cocoa beans. Switzerland is the biggest producer of chocolate. They don't have one cocoa tree in Switzerland. Now, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Nigeria are not allowed to trade our cocoa bean on the Ghanaian stock exchange or the Nigerian stock exchange or the Ivorian stock exchange. You can only trade Ghana's cocoa bean and cocoa powder on the London Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. Ask me why. To keep us poor. And Ghana is not allowed to trade the powder. We're only allowed to trade the bean. Now, let me just do the mathematics for you here. There are companies in America and Europe that buy the bean on the stock exchange and then trade the powder. Now, 1 ton of cocoa bean will give you 2.5 tons of cocoa powder. However, the cost of 1 ton, for example, if a ton of cocoa bean is going for $6,400 now on the London Stock Exchange, $6,400, a ton of cocoa powder is going for $25,000. So as a country, as a Black African country who own and farm the cocoa, we're only allowed to trade the bean at $6,400 per ton. They buy it, they mill it at a cost of about $4,000 per ton to mill it, brings it to about 10,400. But when they mill that 10,400, they get 2.5 tons, which they then sell at $25,000 per ton. So they buy at 6,400, spend 4,000 to mill, and make about over $50,000, about almost $62,500. So you keep Ghanaian farmers poor and keep European and American middle very rich. They've rigged the system. If you say you're not going to sell to them, they're gonna have sanctions against you. They're gonna come after you with all of that. It is sick that a country that doesn't have one cocoa tree, not Belgium, not Holland, not Switzerland, these are the three biggest producers of chocolate, and we sell the bean, and then we import chocolate from these countries. It just doesn't make sense. And so tell me if this is not economic slavery. If this is not, if you tell me that you're going to withdraw the aid that Ghana now needs from the IMF because of poor management and because of corruption, that we've entered into an IMF program, you say you're going to withdraw that if I don't accept sodomy and the sale of Ghanaian children's innocence. Tell me how that's not cultural imperialism. Because the same United States of America goes to Qatar and does business with Qatar. The trade with Qatar, the trade with Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, because they have the money, you respect their culture, you respect their laws, you respect their traditions. The American football national team went to play the World Cup in Qatar and respected the Qatari law. Qatar punishes homosexuality by death. In fact, Qatar spent $22 billion in building infrastructure for the World Cup. 18 billion out of the 22 billion went to American and European companies who were contractors who worked there. So they like the money of the guys who kill people for being gay because they get the money from there. Qatar buys $1 billion worth of military hardware every year from the American economy, and so they do business with them. Saudi Arabia is constantly buying F-16s from the U.S. defense contractors. So it's good business. They turn a blind eye to that. When Kamala Harris visits any of those countries, she covers her hair. She wears a hijab to cover her hair. She respects their culture. But then she comes to Ghana and thinks that she can talk down on us. I don't blame her. I blame my corrupt leaders.
Miss Maxine McLean, our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, she has a question for you. Can you go ahead, Miss McLean?
Sure. Thanks, and let me welcome you to the show. Actually, I have two, because I just want to confirm you are an opposition MP, are you?
Yes,
or are you
currently,
because I was
currently in opposition.
Yeah. How did you manage to get the legislation through? Because that is quite a feat, at least when I look at our political system. So that's the first question, if you could explain how that worked, because our particular situation is not typical, because there's only one now official member of parliament on the opposition side, but traditionally, even with more members of the opposition, how did you get that to happen?
All right, so it's a mixture of a few things. I believe that God has ordered our steps with this, because we've got a speaker. For the first time in Ghana's parliament, we, as the opposition, we put up a speaker candidate at the beginning of this parliament in 2021. Even though we're in the opposition, we actually won that election. And so we had the Speaker of Parliament being a member of the opposition, even though once he becomes Speaker, he's not an elected member of Parliament.
Okay.
So he doesn't have to be partisan. And we've had our fights with him. We think that we elected him, and there are many times he takes a stance against us. But on this particular bill, the Speaker has made a point that he is Catholic and he supports the bill. Now, we have decided to use what I will call soft diplomacy. The gay lobby calls it blackmail and intimidation. Different strokes for different folks. What I've basically done is, for example, when the bill was at committee level, the chairman of the Committee on Constitutional, Parliamentary and Legal Affairs is a member of the government side. And he frustrated the bill for a whole year. on clear instructions not to get the bill to go through. And so what I did was to reach out to the churches in his community, in his constituency. I reached out to the churches in his constituency and said, this is what your member of parliament is doing. He's using his office to block this bill. Is that what you really want? And so when we went on recess in 2022, the MP, as we all do, visited churches to say hi to his constituents. And he called me up after the first Sunday and said, what in God's name are you doing in my constituency? And I said, sorry, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I visited 4 churches, and the introduction in all those 4 churches was, here is our MP, the guy who is fighting the bill against homosexuality, the guy who is supporting homosexuality, and the guy who is fighting Sam George in the church, in Parliament. And the whole church started hooting at him. It happened to him in 4 churches on one Sunday. And then he immediately called me and said, when is the next meeting? We want to have a meeting with you. We need to move this bill. Because then he realized that there was political consequence for him. And that's what we did to all the government MPs. We said to them, the vote on this is not going to be secret. It's open. And we got the media to carry it live. And the speaker will call you and your constituency, the whole country is watching, and ask you how you vote. Because the gay lobby have sponsored people to contest me in my primaries. Thankfully, I won that election because the church rallied behind me. I won that election. But if they could do that, it's also fair game for us to also rally our numbers against any member of parliament who chooses to stand against the bill. And so on this one, we've used soft diplomacy. They call it blackmail, but we've used soft diplomacy.
Ms. McLean, you have another question?
Yes, the other one has to do with the actual legislation, because I noted you made on more than one occasion the comment that you have no interest in people's private activities or whatever. And I think that there's also a distinction between the penalties imposed for what you call public advocacy. Now, the question I have is, what conditions does an individual find himself or herself charged in relation to what I would describe as the private element of it? In other words, one element of the legislation, to my mind, criminalizes what I would describe the promotion of the LGBT agenda. And then there's the other component, and I'm trying to understand how that other component is affected. So in other words, how does an individual find himself or herself charged under the legislation?
All right, so what I'm going to do is just read the legislation to you so that you get the wording of it, the sections of the legislation that deal with criminalization. So Section 4 of the bill is titled Prohibition of LGBTQAP+ and Related Activities. Now we say 4.1 says, a person commits an offense if the person A engages in I, sexual intercourse with a person of the same sex. II, sexual intercourse with an animal. Or III, pansexual activity. And we've defined pansexual activity in the interpretation section of the bill. Basically, pansexual activity has to do with those who choose to marry vehicles and stones and all kinds of inanimate objects. Now, a person commits an offense if the person B marries or purports to marry a person of the same sex as that person. A person commits an offense if the person C knowingly marries or purports to marry a person who has undergone gender or sex reassignment, except in the case of a person who has undergone a surgical procedure to correct a biological abnormality, including intersex. So here, when I mentioned the alphabet, we left I out because intersex is basically hermaphrodites. This is a person who's born with both genitalia, and that's a biological abnormality. You cannot criminalize people for that. Now, a person also commits an offense if the person marries or purports to marry an animal or object. And then a person commits an offense if they hold out as a lesbian, a gay, a transgender, a transsexual, a queer, a pansexual, an ally. So even if you're straight and make yourself an ally and begin to advocate for those activities, the law deals with you. holds out as a non-binary or any other sexual or gender identity that is contrary to the binary categories of male or female. Now, we also say a person commits, now this is the penalty, a person who commits an offense under paragraphs A, B, C, D, E, F, or G of subsection 1 commits a misdemeanor and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of not less than 750 penalty units. Now, 750 penalty units comes to about 3,000 Ghana cedis. 3,000 Ghana cedis at today's exchange rate is just around $260. And not more than 5,000 penalty units. Now, 5,000 penalty units goes up to about 75,000 Ghana cedis. Now, 75,000 Ghana cedis is about $3,000. So it's a range. And the judge is going to look at the specifics of the case. It's going to look at repeat offenders, for example, and then that imposes a more severe punishment, or a term of imprisonment of not less than 2 months and not more than 3 years, or to both. So we give the judges a wide spectrum to allow them choose what kind of punishment they want to give for the activism. And now, again, you need to bear in mind that for you to be found guilty, the prosecution has to establish a prima facie case against you. They have to be able to show evidence. It can't just be on allegation, because there needs to be evidence of it. Because we try to set the bar high so that it doesn't look as though I don't like you, I make an allegation against you and claim that you were involved in it, and then you just got thrown into jail. No. We're still trying to make sure that people get a fair trial, because that's one thing that this bill, and that's one thing I'm very proud about, that this bill is very balanced and tries to look at both sides of the coin and ensure that people have their rights. Now, when it comes to advocacy, which, like I said, is the real intent of the bill, and the thing is, you can't criminalize advocacy without criminalizing the activity that is being advocated for. But the real intent of the act is advocacy. So when you come to section 10, we call that prohibition of propaganda of, promotion of, and advocacy for activities prohibited under this act. Here we say that if you use a medium, that's any media platform, technological platform, so whether it's Facebook, whether it's Zoom, whatever technological platform you use, you commit an offense, and you are liable on summary conviction to a term of imprisonment of not less than 5 years and not more than 10 years. There is no option of a fine here. And in this one, it's easier to prove in court, because once you do advocacy, there is evidence of it. Because advocacy is most times on radio, or even if it was in a public or a setting face-to-face, someone will have a recording of you doing the advocacy. And once we get you doing advocacy, you're locked in. In fact, in 11, we bring in prohibition of propaganda of, promotion of, and advocacy for activities directed at a child. So 10 is general. 11 is specific to children. And in that case, the lowest punishment is 6 years and maximum is 10 years, because again, we need to make the advocacy aimed at children, because we've seen them go into secondary schools and even as low as primary schools to try and tell children that you can love yourself. In fact, we had to fight the introduction of comprehensive sexuality education into the Ghanaian curriculum. They tried to bring it using UNICEF and UNESCO, and it was a huge fight. In fact, the government of Ghana had already gone to take 25 million euros for that. We told them you have to vomit that money because we're not going to accept it. And we kicked it out of our school system. And so that's what's in the bill. But there is a fantastic part of our bill that many people don't know, and the gay community don't like to talk about. It's section 17. I was very awake to the fact that we had extrajudicial treatment of persons on the allegation of being involved in homosexuality, where you see that people are lynched, people are beating up. It's unacceptable. And that's not something we're going to accept. As a lawmaker, I hold the view that even criminals, even armed robbers, have a right to a fair trial in a competent court of jurisdiction. You can't just lynch people. Then there is no difference between us and animals. And so in section 17, we introduce what we call the duty to report and prohibition of extrajudicial treatment. Now it says, A person who has knowledge that an offense is committed under this act shall report the commission of the offense to a police officer, or in the absence of a police officer, to a relevant authority of the community in which the offense is committed. Again, in the interpretation section, we've defined relevant authority to include traditional authority, religious authority, political authority. Then 2, a relevant authority to whom a report is made under subsection 1 shall within 3 days of the report ensure that the report is lodged at the nearest police station. Then 3, and this is where for me it's critical. This is what I think makes our law very unique. Sections 84 to 87 of the Criminal Offences Act 1960 shall apply to a person who commits a misdemeanor if that person verbally or physically abuses, assaults, or harasses a person accused of an offense under this act. So if you decide to exact jungle justice and start lynching people, even if they were involved in homosexuality, you who carries out the lynching would also go to jail for between 6 months to 3 years.
Okay.
Because we want to ensure that even if the person is engaged in homosexuality, let them have their day in court. Let the law deal with them. So I keep saying to the LGBTQ community, this is the first time they have a legislation that ensures that people will not lynch them, because people know there is a price for doing that. So we try to balance this out. In fact, in the original bill, we actually introduced medical care, but we had to take it out because it's a private member's bill. And in Ghana's constitution, it says that a private member's bill cannot be introduced if it has financial consideration. If there's a financial cost element, it can't be a private member's bill. And so I had to drop that, else the bill would have failed. So what we're doing now is working with the churches. I said to the churches, you don't need legislation because you're already doing it. Last year, we helped 56 people who reached out to us and said, we are struggling with homosexuality, we need help. And some of it is just medical. Some of it is endocrinological imbalances. There are men who have higher estrogen levels than testosterone. And there are women who have higher testosterone than estrogen. And they just need to have this endocrinological balances taken care of medically. It's quite expensive, but the church in Ghana is paying for it. Last year, we treated 56 people. This year, already, we have about 8 people in treatment. And so we took that out of the law and said, so that it doesn't fail in Parliament, we can still continue to do the treatment for them quietly on the side.
Mr. Franklin, who is a union leader here in Barbados, has a question for you. Go ahead, Mr. Franklin. Professor Franklin.
Well, before I ask my question, I just want to say to you that I am extremely happy to finally meet you. I was following you, and I was also following the people in Uganda when they had their threats thing, and I was praying that you don't cave into this imperialist nonsense. And I'm much older than you. My first child is your age, and so normally I don't have a lot of heroes that are so young, but I would consider you one of my heroes. And I took particular interest in it because when I was, even before you were born, I was a soldier training in Canada, and I trained with some guys from Ghana. I don't know, I lost track with them, Asare and Bompong. I don't know what became of them, but they were gyrologist guys. And so we had a friendship with them. So I always had an interest in Ghana, even though I've never been. So you can invite me when you choose. But I'm very happy to meet you, honestly, and but my question though is, I believe that it is inconsistent with your diplomatic status for a diplomat from any country to come and oppose the cultural norms and the laws of the receiving country. And I wanted to see your views on trying to get them put out of the country. Because if you're coming here and challenging the laws, I see they do it here in Barbados, the Canadian ambassador, but we call him High Commissioner to Canada, the Canadian High Commissioner, and from Britain, they are out there trying to target our children, and our government is ignoring that behavior, even though it is not consistent with our laws. And I was wondering what your views are about having those people or force asking the government or lobbying to have them removed from the country for um, activities that are not consistent with their status as diplomat.
All right, thank you. I mean, you're right. Article 42 of the Vienna Convention, which is the Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Article 42 is very clear. It says that a diplomat from from another country must respect the local laws and nuances of your receiving country, of your host country. And so it is extremely wrong for foreign diplomats to be pushing such agenda in other countries. But look, it's economic. We just need to call it as it is. You don't see the American ambassador to Saudi Arabia or the British High Commissioner or British ambassador to Saudi Arabia doing some of these things. They will expel you. It's possible to fight those fights. And I'll give you a typical example. In 2021, when I started my advocacy and started pushing this bill, the then Australian High Commissioner to Ghana publicly took me on. He attacked me in public. I went to the stadium to watch one of our biggest local derbies. He was there with the Lebanese ambassador and I think the Kuwaiti ambassador, who are my friends. And they were seated in the presidential stand where I was seated as well. So the gentleman that I was, even though we had a heated argument on radio, I walked up to them and said hi, shook hands with the Lebanese and Kuwaitis who are my friends, and stretched my hand to say hi to him, because I'm, irrespective of what it is, I'm still a gentleman. I consider myself to be a gentleman. And the ambassador actually hit my hands off and used the F word on me. And then I said to him, this is my country, and you insult me this way, I'm going to get you beating up in the stadium. And so I walked downstairs from the stands, and I mean, the supporters of the football club that I support, Accra Hearts of Oak, were standing around me. And then the ambassador came down again to accost me downstairs. And when he came down, everybody was looking at him because he was this white guy. And then I just raised my voice and said to them, well, this is the white guy who's saying that they should sodomize our kids. And immediately the fans just jumped on him. It had to take the military at the stadium to rescue him. Now, that was a Saturday. Monday morning, he had a petition before the Speaker of Parliament saying that I should be censured in Parliament because I had led a mob to attack him. So what I then did was also get my constituents. I got about 200 of my constituents to write letters to the Australian High Commission, the Australian Foreign Mission, Foreign Ministry in Australia, and the Australian Parliament. And we chronicled a number of the things he had done. In 3 weeks, he was withdrawn. He was sent back to Australia. So it comes back to how you choose to fight. The Americans have decided that their diplomacy is going to be LGBTQ. They have an LGBTQ ambassador embedded within the Ghanaian embassy. And not just in Ghana, in several countries. They have a rep of LGBTQ rights in the embassy, whose job it is to push a lot of this ideology. It is against the Vienna Convention. If you have a president who is strong, for example, Uganda has a very strong president. I mean, I may not agree with him in everything because I believe in democracy and the right for the people to choose. He's been president for over 27 years, Yoweri Museveni. But he's been strong enough to say to the diplomats, if you stay in my country, you respect the laws of my country, and you cannot be involved in the local politics of my country. Until our leaders begin to take that stand, you're going to have these diplomats running riot. And I asked Virginia Palmer, the US ambassador to Ghana, I said to her, do you think the Ghanaian ambassador to the United States could go on radio and criticize the American people for criminalizing polygamy? Would you accept that? The United States is imprisoning people for polygamy, which we practice and accept in Ghana as a cultural practice. But our ambassador to the United States respects the US law and doesn't speak about it because he respects the host country. So if you think polygamy is wrong and we think homosexuality is wrong, why don't we respect each other's views? You know, so it comes back to the leadership of the country and how firm they will be. That's really what it is.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know this is getting it's 12:08 in
Yes, it's past
Ghana right
midnight.
now. It is
I've got a very
past
early morning.
midnight, and we to ask him for 1 hour, and he's gone over by 8 minutes. I'm so conscious of that. So I just want to say to you, sir, thank you so very much for being on. I'm going to keep in touch with you via phone because, listen, we have some things we've got to deal with here in the Caribbean region, and I suspect we're going to need your help. So we want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been very educational, I must say, very educational, very, very motivational as well. Thank you. It's great to see.
Marcia, before you finish off this segment, I would ask him if he would be gracious enough to send us a copy of that bill or that act. No.
I will send it straight to Marsha. And
yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure everybody out there thanking you for being here tonight, and it's a big sacrifice to you. Sir, can you in just take half a minute? What do you want to say to Barbadians watching and to those in the Caribbean as it relates to this fight that we're dealing with the same thing here? What do you say to us, sir?
There is nothing more important than the innocence of your kids, and this is about the future. I've told people that whatever the cost this is to me, whether it's personal, I mean, we've had embassies turn you down visas and all of that. I can't change a single dollar anywhere in the world if I travel. I've been put on they claim I'm doing money laundering. It's all meant to just shut me up. But I tell my people in Ghana, I say to them, the independence of Ghana came at a huge price. It came at a huge cost. But we're proud today to be an independent state. We sparked a whole revolution on the African continent. In 1957, when Ghana gained independence, they said it wasn't going to be possible for us to run our own affairs. They said we didn't have the human resources, the manpower to man even the civil service. It came at huge cost to us, but we pulled it off. This is for our children. We need to pull this off for our children. We need to hold the family, the unit that is fundamental to life. We need to hold it. It's going to come at cost. Don't get it twisted. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be cheap. It's going to be expensive. It's cost me an arm and a leg to push this bill. It's expensive. It is tough. It is going to come at, I mean, I get hate mail from across the world. They've moved away from me. Now they're attacking my wife, attacking my children. It comes at a price, but you need to be ready to stand for something. And look, this is about who can hold their breath the longest, because they will buckle. They will finally buckle. But we just need to be persevere and show perseverance. And I believe we'll pull this through. And the moment we all begin to create the synergies across the pond, from the Caribbean through Africa, I believe that we will hold something that's right, and God will come through for us. But most importantly, we need to add a lot of prayer to this, because trust me, this fight, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a spiritual person or not, believe me, it's not just a physical fight. It's also a very spiritual one. And so you need to be prepared for the journey both ways. It's a tough one, but it's one that is winnable. Trust me.
Yes. Thank you so much, Honorable Sam.
Thank you. Take care.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.